Okay, good afternoon. It is Monday, November 4th, regularly scheduled Transportation Commission meeting. I will call the roll. Okay, Ballard's here. David McKinney.
Here.
Ryan Lancaster.
Present.
Ryan Hall. No Ryan Hall. Tracy Hopkins.
Here.
Stephen Lewis.
Here.
Brian Leslie.
Here.
Tom LeClaire.
Present.
Michael Menard.
Here.
Luke Kavanagh may be joining us. John Martin.
John Wasson for Sean Martin.
Thanks, John. Tony Tisdale.
Here.
Ian Updike. Lisa Tansom.
Here.
Did I get that right? Alyssa?
Alyssa Taysom.
Taysom. Okay, strike two. All right. But you're here. Justin Price. Okay. Adoption of the agenda. Mr. Lancaster, you have a couple of items you would like to add, I understand.
Mr. Chairman, I do. I would like to move to add two items to our agenda.
New business?
Yes, new business.
So that would be like 5G and 5H?
Well, actually, if I may suggest the order as well. Well, I'll make the motion and then we talk about the order. How about that? Is that
Okay.
fair? So I'd like to move to add items to talk about the role of the Transportation Commission and to add a separate item for providing road signs for city ordinances. So that is my motion, Mr. Chairman. I guess if I may add the reason for those, just very briefly. So we have an election tomorrow, if you hadn't noticed, and one of the main topics there is that the candidates have talked about is transportation. I think it would be a good time for us to remind ourselves of our role in transportation in the city of Meridian. And I know that our agenda says that, our packet says that Sergeant Frazier will talk about street signs for ordinances, but I think I would like, I would like to have a little more discussion about that. So, I think we can talk about it with Sergeant Frazier, but I would like to give it its due as its own agenda topic as well. So that's my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Chairman, I second.
Okay.
There.
Commissioner LeClaire seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, Mr. Lancaster, why don't we, that's noted. I just have those as 5G and H. And we'll get to those. I think they're worthwhile topics. Okay, so 2, adoption of agenda as.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a question about the agenda.
Okay. Someone else is down there.
In the packet, it talks a little bit about how we're going to get an update on shared vehicles in Meridian at
Yes.
some point, and I was wondering if that needs its own agenda item under old business, or if it's going to be included in something else today.
Well, those are staff communications, are they not?
Mr. Chair, I can cover that.
Mr. Hood?
It's up to you. I was planning on covering it under the transportation projects update. I do have a couple of graphics that I'll show you just with ridership numbers for August and September, as well as monthly totals and deployment and things. If you want to make that a separate topic, up to you, but that's where it's at, is under transportation projects update currently.
Mr. Lewis, we'll call that 4B.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Shared rides, Mr. Hood, we'll just call that, you got transportation projects, and I'll just call that 4B. Okay. Any other comments for the agenda? All right, item 2. Mr. Lewis and I discussed item 3, approval of the minutes. Did anyone else see changes, typos, corrections, additions, what have you?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster?
I do have a proposed revision to the meeting minutes. So in,
Mr. Lewis and I missed something?
Probably.
well, I don't know if you missed anything or not, but
Okay.
here's my suggestion. So on 5B, so new business, hands-free driving ordinance, I would like to revise the first sentence of that paragraph to say Sergeant Frazier informed the commission that a hands-free ordinance hearing was postponed to October 8th, et cetera. So replace the word updated with informed and the word the with a. My reason for doing so is I went back and looked at the August meeting minutes, and I didn't see that this was a topic discussed before, so I think informed is a better word choice than updated.
Okay, so we're going to change the verb from updated to informed. And you had one other addition?
That was it. Those,
Okay.
yeah, informed and a in that first line, so.
Okay, all right. So we have a brief or a small change there. Do we have a motion approving the minutes?
So moved with the changes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Have a second twice. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, item 3, with the changes, old business transportation updates, Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The transportation projects update memo begins on page 9 in your packet. And as I typically do, I don't plan on reading this to you, but I do want to highlight a couple of the items in that packet and stand for any questions you may have on any of the projects in the memo or other projects you may have heard about that may not be in the memo. Let's see. First one I think I wanted to highlight was actually on page 11. That's the Fairview Locust Grove signal. There was a project team kickoff meeting late last month. Just a handful of folks from ACHD present, but they're looking at either a 9x7 or a 9x8 intersection there at Fairview and Locust Grove. They did a traffic study, kind of went through that, and there's the timeline for that project. I tell you that for 2 reasons. One, that's a pretty major intersection. It won't be in construction for another little bit. But 2, there's been some banter about the community about the width of the mile segments in between some of these major intersections. And this is one that I think will come up into the future, will be the width of the northern leg as it transitions from about Chateau Drive. So if you're familiar with the intersections of Fred Meyer and then some storage units, and then there's a signal at Chateau. Some of those neighborhoods then after that, or even right there, get pretty constrained. The traffic volumes will tell you you need to have a 5-lane roadway, but there's an impact to the neighborhood there. And so there's a segment of Locust Grove by the high school that ACHD has been preserving for 3 lanes, but the traffic volumes say you need to build 5. Well, landscape buffers go away, and then you're putting 5-lane facilities in people's backyards. And so there's this push and pull tug of, well, yeah, you need to move the cars, but it's also where people live, and there's a quality of life element here. So anyways, just expect that we'll have some conversations about that into the future, and how much do we move people and goods and services? Yes. How much, at what point is that too much and really a significant impact to existing neighborhoods? So, but that intersection, again, is going into design. They have some consultant help that they're looking for, and what does my memo say? December 1st, so here in about another month, they should know who's going to help them design that project.
Mr. Hood, I apologize for interrupting, but is one of the thoughts to take a row of houses away like they did on Curtis years ago?
So, Mr. Chair, we did not talk about that. That was the intersection only for now. We talked about things like, what are you going to do during construction? Is there a way to detour? Again, 9x7 versus 9x8 intersection. even pedestrian refuge, is that something we should have the consultant look at? 9 lanes of traffic is a long ways to cross. So you have to give, 50 seconds of time for somebody to cross a 9-lane roadway. So we haven't gotten that far into what the real impacts are, and I think that's part of the conversation. At what point does the cost start to say, well, but the benefit isn't there now because you are buying half the side of 12 homes or whatever. So
Thank you for the interruption.
moving on, then I actually don't have a lot, and you have other things on your agenda this month, so I wasn't planning on giving you too many updates, and some of them again are explicit updates. State Highway 69. CUNA to Meridian traffic study, that's another agenda item that we'll talk about separately. I'm gonna touch on the next two briefly, knowing that Sergeant Fraser is going to talk about them as well, the air compression brakes and the hands-free ordinance. And then we got those agenda items. Shared vehicles is in 4A in the memo, so I will pause there, and those are the only ones I really wanted to highlight for you before almost immediately transitioning then into shared vehicles. I know it's quick, but again, you have other things on your agenda this month, so I didn't spend a lot of time on those projects.
What do you have for shared vehicles for us, Mr. Hood?
So on the screen, hopefully, did you all get your screens to turn on this month? Okay. So here are some numbers for, say, shared vehicles. These are the e-scooters. So the city has entered into a contract with Bird that runs through this calendar year. I've got 2 months of data from them so far. I don't have the October numbers yet, but I do have August and September. So you can see in front of you the August numbers. They deployed on middle of the week, so 8/5 is when the scooters went out, August 5th. For the month, they had 2,500 trips, and again, you can see that broken down by week. And then how many scooters were actually deployed, and then users. What I haven't asked them is if these are, if the 1,300 users are unique users, or if that includes the same person riding it 4 or 8 times, if that's rides or users, essentially. But that's the information I have for August. I also have September, but I just wanted to kind of show you those numbers. They're certainly lower, both in the scooters in circulation and in the trip generation, than what we were anticipating. I almost said hoped for, but we didn't really have a goal as far as trips. We were hoping that it would be useful to the community. What we don't have here is, was this trip for work, for recreation, for, commute, whatever, for joy, for pleasure, whatever. And that's kind of the next step. We can dig deeper into this information and kind of figure out, what are they being used for, or why aren't people using them more? The deployment is one of the main concerns we have now, because they're actually supposed to put more of them out there and make them available. Part of that is just sort of my opinion. If, they're a private business, why am I going to tell them to deploy more scooters if no one's going to ride them? I mean, that's kind of a business decision. Our contract caps how many they can have on the street at any one time. We actually have a floor as well. Quite frankly, they aren't hitting the minimum they're supposed to have on the street. But some of the feedback is, why would I tell them to flood our community with more of something that isn't going to be used? I'll let them kind of figure that out. But there's also a conversation coming Wednesday with the council on the same topic. So today, if you have any thoughts, matters, experiences with whatever you would like me to share with the council as I talk to them, what do we do next year? So in January, should we give Bird another year so we can get more data, collect that information, have a better understanding of what this looks like in our community? Should we put out for RFP again and open it up to other service providers? Bird certainly wouldn't be excluded. But those are the two high-level questions. Like, we got to gear up for having somebody at the first of the year. So how does the council want to proceed? So again, if you have any input in that, as you think about that, let me show you September. It looks real similar. So you can see the trips, and again, very, very similar. I imagine as the weather turns colder, you will see the numbers go down. Again, I don't have October yet. That's one of the things we've talked about as staff is having a ramp up and ramp down period. Like during the winter time, have at least 100 available. During the summer, maybe 150, something like that. So again, if you have any comments on this, or again, just experiences or thoughts on how we could make this more successful. Again, we haven't even defined what success is, but ways that could make this more user-friendly or useful for members of the community without becoming a nuisance. That's kind of how I define it, is if we can help people with first and last mile, that's great. We don't want to be a burden or create safety concerns on sidewalks and ADA ramps and blocking accesses to buildings and businesses. So, but there's the numbers. They did also shoot me a map, but it's just a bunch of colors. You can't really make it out, and it's not electronic. It's just a static PDF of a map. So I didn't bring that today. But so that's my update. And again, we'll re-kick that off with council on Wednesday. So anything you have to share with me that I can share with them is appreciated.
Comments, questions for Mr. Hood?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Caleb, have there been any problems, complaints, et cetera, with this rollout of the scooters?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner. We have about 15 complaints that are, so before we kick this off, we set up a database where anybody in the city basically can log in and basically log a complaint on behalf of a customer. Depending on what the complaint is and the severity of it, I also have the direct line to Bird representative to say, hey, you need to rectify this now. Or if it's been corrected and it was somebody got buzzed in a park or something, then we say, hey, this was buzzed in a park. We're not going to write them a ticket, but it's good to know that this was a concern. There are about 15 of those since August 5th when they deployed. Quite frankly, I thought it was going to be more than that. That's been a lot less than what I was thinking would probably be. We want zero, right? We don't want any complaints. But there haven't been any, I don't want to say serious because they're all important, but there haven't been any real accidents or incidents like that I'm aware of.
Any issues that have been brought up with ACHD?
I have not personally had to engage with ACHD on that. Again, 9/10 of them have been about a user parking them someplace they weren't supposed to, blocking a sidewalk, blocking a business. And it seems that those communications then, when I've had that with Bird, is please have either your nester stage these correctly, or educate your riders to not park them in this area or geofence it. And quite frankly, they've been pretty good, pretty responsive, and I think there's only been one person that has multiple entries in our database where we're tracking this. So for the most part, it's, hey, can you not do this? And they're pretty responsive.
Okay, good. Listen, I have one additional question on the project update. It's the Idaho Highway 16 entry. Excuse me. My understanding is that ITD was holding an informational meeting about this project recently. I don't recall the date. Do you know, has that already happened, or is it still upcoming?
I don't recall from memory. Let me look that up, maybe while we do some other business, and circle back to that, and I'll let you know
That'll be
when
fine.
that is.
Caleb, it was last week.
It was last week? Okay.
30th is what I heard from the peanut gallery.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
on the shared vehicles, on the Bird scooters, I have another question if I could ask Mr. Hood. I know in the ordinance, the franchise fee was set up, at least in part, based on estimates of what city staff time was estimated to be to to maintain the program and so forth. I was curious in the 2 months of operation if you've seen what effort the city has had to put in, and if it's commensurate with the franchise fee that's being charged the vendor.
Yeah, good question, Mr. Chair. So I have not run that, but in that database I mentioned where we track, there is an estimated time time spent with whoever you're complaining or whatever. So I haven't actually totaled those up because we're only 2 to 3 months into the program yet. So at the end of the year, for this year it was prorated, it was around $5,000 I think for August, September, October, November, December. I think it was somewhere around $20,000, maybe it was 25. On an annual basis, but it was prorated for this year since we didn't get it started until later in July, I think is when they actually technically could have deployed, but they waited a little bit longer. So again, to answer your question more directly, I've not calculated that yet, but we can because we are tracking the amount of time spent dealing with these issues in a database.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Leslie.
Caleb, was there any sort of indication about the 2 months in September that have drastically different trips? So you have 9/1 and the 9/30 that are significantly off the mark from every other month.
So, Mr. Chair, just to read that, so that's just one day in that week. So that was just a single day, 9/1 to 9/1. The other ones are actually a full 7-day week. So that's six-day week.
Thank you, I missed that. The only thing I would be interested in seeing in addition to this would be point to point, where are they going? Are they looping around, leaving from one spot and going back to it? Are they going from A to B? How far they're going and time?
So
I think you could get a lot more information off of that.
So, Mr. Chair, this is part of the discussion, I think, for council too, and even back to my what does success look like and how much time should staff be spending on this? I agree. I don't know that that's what we should be doing, though, is trying to figure that out. I mentioned it. I have a map that shows those 1,700 trips. It's just a bunch of green and red and yellow lines everywhere. You couldn't track any one. Now, they have it, right, electronically, but they just give me a static map that paints that picture, but it really doesn't paint much of a picture. So I agree, if with more information, we could make this more successful. I'll be honest with me personally, as the project manager, I don't have bandwidth to do that. I don't have time to go and figure out how we can make this more successful, and quite frankly, why should I? Like, why am I working for a private company to make sure that more trips are being provided? And it's rhetorical, I get why I kind of should, but should I? That's not been, we don't get paid based on how many trips are made as a city. They're paying for my weight, but that didn't envision us making this the most successful program for them possible in that $5,000. So I think that's part of the conversation for this next year with council is, even though we didn't define success, I don't know that anybody would say this has been a successful program thus far. Should we try to make it more successful? And then based on that input from council, so I hear what you're saying and I'm asking you for feedback. That's something already on my list, like what should staff be doing if more than documenting issues with this?
Right, so I wouldn't expect the staff to come up with that data. We should ask Bird for it because they have it and they would be able to supply it to us, I would imagine, so.
Well, again, maybe just to follow up a little bit on that, Mr. Chair, if it's okay. They've been good to share the data. I just don't know what I would do with it. I get it. I look at it or maybe not. What am I supposed to, until we have a real, like a program to say Parks is going to set aside some money to fill in gaps. So, looking at that, it's like, oh yeah, if we made this connection, maybe we could, instead of people having to go around, they could go right there. But we don't have anything like that where we're investing in infrastructure for this or really anything. So I just don't know what I would do with it. I can get it and share it, but we're not going to really analyze it. That's what I'm saying. Well, at least thus far, we're not charged with doing that type of work.
Sure, okay.
It's good though, and it is, again, something on the list to talk with council about. What should we should we be doing? Are we trying to supplement or really offer viable alternatives to transportation? And if so, we probably need to partner more.
Mr. Chairman
Yes.
and Caleb. So you said that, they're paid like a flat fee per month is what the city pays?
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, it's annual. So just an annual flat fee to start.
And how much was it? I'm sorry, I don't know these things.
I don't have it in front of me. It's either $20,000 or $25,000 a year.
All right. And in that contract, there's a minimum number of scooters they're supposed to have?
Correct.
And they don't have that now.
Correct.
And so, and it looks like these numbers of scooters are diminishing as we
Correct.
go into the winter. So it seems like if there's feedback, the council needs to review and revise this program. I mean, they need to set more realistic goals or if we were expecting 100 or more scooters and we're not getting them, why are we paying so much? So, I mean, it doesn't seem like very much in a $17 million budget maybe, but it's a project and it should be reviewed and is it fulfilling its goals? It seems like it's not. So it's just a matter of them. I'm sure they'll see all this at their meeting too, but if you want feedback, it seems like here's one commissioner that thinks that this program is not, this contractor is not fulfilling their contract. And if they're unable to, then the whole thing should be reviewed and revised by the council or by us and then approved by the council. So that's some feedback.
So thank you. And Mr. Chair, I think I mentioned it in my earlier one. That is one of the things that we're going to talk with council about in the next contract is to have a ramp up, ramp down. So is it realistic to have 100 scooters in January? Maybe we say, hey, have 50 available in January, but in June or May, you should have 150 or whatever that is. So that is, we didn't seasonally account for that in the contract, and we need to. That's something we'll recommend. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Tisdale.
Point of clarification for Commissioner Leclerc. It sounds like he was referring to the city paying for the contract. It's the opposite, isn't it? They are paying the city. I think just for clarification.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the franchisee pays the city to operate within city limits. So that's why I said before, they're paying a fee. If they don't think it's making them money to deploy 200 scooters, why am I going to call them up and say, push more of your product out there that no one's using? They should have a pretty good idea of how much product they need out there. And again, the city doesn't get compensated by how many are actually rolling. We thought that was a good number to say, hey, make them available. So it is sort of a service. Don't flood us with thousands of these so they're everywhere. But so we are kind of in a learning. We're trying to gather some data and understand what works and what doesn't, and modify the contract. But thank you, I didn't understand. Yes, they pay the city to be our provider of this service. But we will look at the service and still make sure it makes sense for everybody.
Anything else for Mr. Hood? Lancaster, you?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think this would be a good topic for us to consider, particularly before the council, or there's a presentation to the council again. I think I would like to be a little bit better prepared to discuss this if we have time to discuss this at the December meeting. I don't know what the time frame is for, again, having this discussion with the city council, but I think it's both appropriate for this commission to engage in that conversation, and I would like to do so again if December fits for the time frame.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can just follow up a little bit. I think December works. I will let you know, though, there probably will be some decisions made by council between now and December. I'm coming to them this Wednesday, to say, how do you want us to start to gear up? Do you want us to put another RFP on the street? You want us to potentially talk with Bert about changing our existing contract to ramp up, ramp down, and maybe a couple other little tweaks and try it for another year? So some of that, at least that decision, we may get that direction from council to say, what model? Do you want to go with multiple service providers? Just extend it with them for one more year to collect more data? Or essentially start over and put it on the street, so to speak, and let everybody know. But as far as what's in the contract and some of those things, I think December, I mean, if you want to get into the details of some of that, I think that would work fine.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, I have one
Hopkins.
comment. So when we were riding the VRT, taking the bus, what I noticed is a lot of people will get off the bus and grab a scooter and get to where I want to think the limiting factor is the fact that people are driving to wherever, and so they don't need a scooter. There's not a bus service that's covering enough Meridian to make those scooters more valuable. I think that would definitely spike your scooter use if you had bus service to more of the city.
Food for thought. Anything else? Okay, 4A, transportation updates, supplemented with shared rides. Items closed. New business, 5A. Meridian Police Department update, Sergeant Frazier. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Hope you all are well. It's been a busy month, I guess. A lot's changed since the last time we spoke. Obviously, the hands-free law in Meridian was adopted by the city. It became effective on the 1st of November. And thereby we've begun an educational campaign for the public, which obviously has already started to several degrees. With me in the audience today is Stephanie Galbraith. She is the newly appointed PIO for Meridian City Police and Fire Department. And she's been working very hard with the police department and me to do things like establish locations for educational billboards about the hands-free ordinance, working with the State Office of Highway Safety to partner and fund on some of those ventures to educate the public over the next couple months about the hands-free ordinance. She's also working, and the police department's also working to have a PSA that's run in the village cinema, like our organization has done before for other things, to educate the public about the ordinance. And I know we talked about some of the particulars of the ordinance in the last meeting. It obviously has been adopted in earnest now, so it is law, and it's out there for everyone to read. But again, it prohibits the use of handheld wireless communication device, which primarily the number one item that we look at, or when we think about that, is a cell phone, obviously, while you're driving or operating a vehicle. That includes while you're stopped at a stop sign or stoplight, unlike the texting and driving code now. The police department and the city has indicated since the beginning that the law would become effective in the first part of November, and that enforcement really wouldn't begin until after the first of the year, and that the whole campaign or the whole ordinance is not about writing tickets. It's not about generating revenue, as some people have indicated. It is about the large constituency in the city who actually have voiced their opinions to council in support of an ordinance like this. And it's about having safer roadways and preventing distracted driving crashes, which I believe Councilman Borton was on a radio show earlier this month. He had me compile some data. So far, year to date, property damage crashes have caused about $250,000 worth of loss to people that are involved in crashes like that. And in Meridian, right about 20% of all the injury and property damage crashes we have can be directly attributed to inattention or distracted driving, and that runs about 5 to 10% higher than some other sample areas that we've seen. Along with that education campaign, or the component, we're talking about roadway signs, which we're obviously going to talk about today. And we need to get signs out on the roadways, the highways, to educate the public about this ordinance. It's the same as we would do with a minimum posted speed limit. One of the challenges we have, and we would obviously look to the commission for input on this topic, is where do we put these signs and how many of them does there need to be? There's obviously other stakeholders involved, like the ITD and the ACHD. Decisions about how big the signs are, how many words they're going to have on them, exactly what those words are going to say, all need to be made. But preliminarily, even if we look at ITD and the roadways that they maintain through our city, we obviously have the state highways. And as we push west, we can see in the future that we keep growing west. So we need to have discussions about sign placement. Where do we put them in relation to our city limits now? And then how long is it going to be before we have to move them farther west? The same thing can be said in South City with ACHD. In some locations, the true city limit actually runs south of Columbia. In other locations, it's barely past Victory. So where do we put those signs now? And then how long is it going to be before we move them further south? Thankfully, to the east and north, those boundaries are fairly well determined. But being the largest city that's adopted an ordinance like this in Idaho, there's obviously a lot of ways into our city. And there can be confusion in the motoring public, especially when you're on the Eagle Road area, when you're in Meridian and when you're not. So we need to make that very clear. And along with that, Ada County, the city of Nampa, and the city of Meridian have all expressed interest or spoken with our city or the police department about the specifics in our ordinance and have expressed a general interest in exploring that as an option for their community as well. That's the biggest, the bulk of the updates or the information I have to share. Certainly would be happy to take questions, comments about that. And then obviously I'll be here for the future agenda items.
Sergeant, not to steal your thunder, does Stephanie have any comments, or is she?
Surely she does.
She's the public information officer, I understand? So we'll give you a little FaceTime.
Well, thank you very much. As Sergeant Fraser has said, I've been working with the Meridian Police Department now for 5 years doing public education and prevention, which was a great segue into the public information officer position that was just recently posted. And it's a great opportunity to extend the education and the knowledge base I have to a larger platform. And I already have a lot of great relationships with ITD and Office of Highway Safety, so this is a great first project that I'm working on, and Sergeant Fraser is a wealth of knowledge, keeping me up to date on signage and codes and what have you, so
Very
that's
good.
my piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Sergeant, I know it's just four days into the month, but has there been any difference, or do you see any difference, or is it just too new?
To a degree, it's too new. I will say that we have an uptick in people suddenly putting their phones down because they're putting two and two together, or they're reminding themselves that Meridian is hands-free now. Some data tells us that a lot of people don't change their behavior. It's kind of like a speed limit. People know that they violate the speed limit sometimes, and they basically risk getting a ticket or being detected. I think it'll take several months until we can say that the general public or the motoring public is fully aware and cognizant of that issue. I think it's hard for everybody to catch on. It is a new concept here in the Treasure Valley. It's certainly unprecedented to have an ordinance of this scope across the population this big. And again, gradual enforcement begins after the first of the year. You'll start to see patrols that are centered around perhaps people who are running a red light and using their cell phone, things like that. Again, this is not a situation where the police department has, frankly, the time just to drive around pulling over everybody that's on their cell phone and writing as many tickets as we can. It's a bigger picture than that.
Questions for Sergeant Fraser on this topic?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Leslie?
So Sergeant Fraser, is there any rules or regulations around signage requirements for this hands-free ordinance?
There's a lot of variables there. Frankly, I'm not familiar with every last contingency. there's general requirements for signage that you want people to be able to read and see. You have to have signs that can be read in the daytime and at nighttime. You have to have signs that would comply with criminal procedure for use in court. They have to be very specific in terms of what the sign is informing the public. And in working with ITD and ACHD on the matter, we can't have the signs where there's too much other sign clutter, things of that nature. So there's a lot of intricacies that go into it in deciding how big, what are the letters, where should it be, and those things. I know certainly representatives of ITD and ACHD could weigh in more on dimensions of the sign, size of the letters, things of that nature. But they would be a kind to speed limit signs and other signs you see on the road, and signs for these types of things like you've seen in other cities.
So I guess my basic question is, do we have to put up signs to enforce it?
At a basic level, yes. There does have to be a good faith effort to inform the motoring public, and really the best parallel for this is a minimum speed limit. If you're going to have a city that has a minimum speed limit and you're going to write somebody a ticket for going faster than that limit when there's not a speed limit sign nearby or that they drove by on that roadway, generally in court, in order for that charge to hold up, you've got to show that within the limits of that city, it's posted and readily known to the public at large that that ordinance or that thing exists. The degree to which you have to educate the public, or how many signs, or do we need them on every major thoroughfare, or would 2 signs do for the whole city? That's undecided, and it would be on a case-by-case basis in terms of court. But I think in a good faith effort, it's going to take a lot of signs.
Thank you. So it sounds like you're kind of alluding to putting them around the perimeter as you enter the city.
Yeah, if you're not going to put one, take ACHD roads, for example, if you're not going to put one on every major road, Cherry, Usick, McMillan, Shinden, and all the way down, if you're not going to put them on all of those, which ones would you put them on and why? Because each one of those and have a large swath through the city, and a lot of those you can continue into neighboring cities, north, south, east, and west. So to me, if you're not going to put them on all, then how would you choose which ones to put them on?
Yeah.
ITD roads are a little easier. You've got Chinden, Eagle Road, Highway 69, and Meridian, and then the interstate. I would say on each barrier with those, and I would think the same with the ACHD main thoroughfares also.
Yeah. I don't have any good suggestions there. Thank you.
Any other questions? Excuse me, were you finished?
I am, thank you.
My apologies. Other questions for Sergeant Frazier? Sergeant, does anyone put a pencil to the cost of posting the signs, making the signs?
Not exactly. Some of that we're waiting to hear back from ACHD and ITD. Upon designing, purchasing, and manufacturing the signs, for example, ITD will install them free of charge, as I'm told. But the exact cost of that is unknown at this point.
I was just curious because it's part of the equation, but
Certainly.
yes.
I'm curious to know that answer too.
All right, so we've got the cell phone issue. Is there, let's see, what else is on your agenda, Sergeant?
I believe I'm still a part of the new agenda item. I will add, however, if I can, along with the hands-free ordinance came the compression braking
Yes, that's
ordinance
excellent, yes.
that was passed at the same time. Along with that ordinance come some of the same signage requirements.
Okay,
So as you move forward with design, Mr. Chairman, excuse me.
No, you're fine.
As you move forward, will we, like, I imagine we'll see updates here. Here's a prototype, or here's how it looks on paper. What do you think?
And any feedback or comments along those lines is certainly welcome. The only constraints we have is we have to communicate what is in the ordinance in 6 or 7 words.
Yeah.
You can't have too many words. But you need to clearly communicate what's in the ordinance.
It might be visually good to have like a cell phone with a red circle and a slash, some symbolic way of expressing those words. You
Yeah.
might think about, be creative on that kind of an idea.
The billboard that Stephanie has worked with OHS to create has that exact symbol on it. And that may well also be incorporated with some other educational campaigns. The tricky thing about signs is, along with the symbol has to come words so that people unequivocally understand what it means.
Very good. Anything else for Sergeant Frazier? Sergeant, you have your hands full.
Absolutely.
We appreciate your time and your efforts, and Stephanie, come back and visit us again and tell us what you're doing to educate us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sergeant. Let's see here. Default speed limit discussion, Randy Spywak?
Close.
Spiewak?
Yes.
Okay. Well, introduce yourself, sir, if you will.
I'm Randy Spiewak. I live at Heritage Commons subdivision, Locust Grove, between McMillan and Ustick. I've been a homeowner in Meridian since 2005 and an Idahoan since 2000. But I originally spent 60 years in Florida. I was on October 2nd at Tammy's home for one of her listening tours, and a group of 8 or 10 homeowners and businesses. And one of the topics that came up was a concern by one of the mothers that was there about the speed of traffic within her neighborhood. I sat and listened, and then I shared with them what our homeowners association did a number of years ago with the help of John, and trying to find ways to, John Wasson with ACHD, trying to find ways to reduce the speed within our residential areas. So, let me give this to you first. We had, you'll get a picture of, in our entrance, once you go within the subdivision about 500 feet, you hit one of our 3 parks, our largest park that has a pavilion in it. And there's a sign at the entrance when you have to stop, and it gives you information, permanent information about the HOA in the park. But below it, we have the ability to do signs that we change quite often, listing events. There's Saturday movie night, it's the fall festival or whatever. Well, this is the sign that was on there for the longest time. The symbol of a child playing, 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, watch for our children. And that would hang on there below that sign unless we had an event. One of the homeowners were still concerned that cars, especially on Layfield, were doing 45, 50 miles an hour. Not all the time, but enough of them that were flying down that road that we work with John. We've got a number of stop signs that were added, and that worked out great, and it's helped quite a bit. But one of the former board members said, you know, we're not going to get it changed by just demanding people drive slower, because a lot of the folks that are coming down our perimeter residential streets don't even live in our neighborhood. They live in the subdivisions around us. Well, anyway, he came up with this idea, and that's the one you see there. 20 is plenty. We also put these on movable signs and set them in the people's yards along the residential roads, and then would change them every week or two. If they sit in the same place much more than a week or two, you just drive by and you don't even notice it anymore. At least that's our observation. But as you move them around, people see something different and it catches their eye. But when I explained or shared this information at Tammy's listening tour, she said, would you be willing to share this with our Transportation Commission? Jody St. Martin was there and came up and asked me. I got an email from her on the 7th of October, so that's why I'm here. So I'm not going to take 20 minutes. I'm going to take 5. And I just want to share with you from memory what I shared with the people at that listening tour in response to this young mother's concern about her children and the speed of the roads within her neighborhood. As you may already be aware, that our our delimited, or our speed within residential subdivisions is a maximum of 25 miles an hour. Boise's 20, Nampa's 20, Eagle's 25, Cuna's 25, we're 25. And does that 5 mile an hour, 20% slower do much? I've had a number of our homeowners drive down our streets at 25 and see how quickly they can stop. Because when you have cars on narrow residential streets parked on one side, or worse yet, on both sides, and a child comes out between a car on a bike or just runs out catching a ball or something, you don't have much time to stop. And does it make much difference? And I did it myself again last night at 21 miles an hour. I could stop considerably quicker than if I was doing a constant 25. And hit the brakes even if I burned rubber skidded on the road. So here's some of the things I thought I would at least mention. I think that if we slowed our speed down to match what Boise and Nampa do, that 20 mile an hour within residential area would be safer for kids crossing the street who many times don't watch for traffic. Even though moms and dads try to encourage them to, kids are kids. When cars are parked on both sides, it's difficult to stop quickly. I think it also would give our police officers a little more evidence of speeding in residential areas, and the potential of a person hitting that higher fine when you're 16 or more miles an hour above the speed limit. So if you go from 20 to 36 versus 25 to 41, we might, in paying that larger fine, might discourage some bit of speeding. It was interesting after ACHD and John helped us with a study on traffic speed, especially on Washakie and Layfield and our perimeter streets. One lady, and she'll remain nameless, sat in a lawn chair out on the side of the road with her bright chrome-colored hair dryer, and just went like this as cars went by, and almost without exception, everybody hit the brakes. What does that tell you? Everybody was doing more than 25, because there's a 25 mile an hour sign there. So just with a hair dryer. So we know people are speeding. I think if we did this, it'll result, if 20 miles an hour was accepted by the city, it'll result in the replacing of the 25 mile an hour signs with 20. There's a cost, and I wasn't sure if that was city, ACHD, or what. But in talking to my counterparts at other HOAs, and we got many of them, 500 and some odd in the Meridian area alone, many HOAs that are would be glad to help funding that cost, because it does improve safety within their community. And I don't even know how that works with the state or the county or the city, but they could share in the cost of new signage. The poles are there, concrete's in, you just need to unbolt the signs and put new ones on. And it might be a great place to put that circular sign with the no cell phone, so that you'd have within residential areas, you're reminding people when they're driving slower and will look at it, that cell phones aren't to be used while you're driving. Then ITD can worry about the main corridors. It's safer for the city of Meridian contracted garbage and recycling collection trucks. They're stop and go all the way down, and if cars are trying to get around them, 20 miles an hour is a safer speed to get around than 25. It's safer for our postal carriers. I asked our postal carrier, who's been there for 17 years, Barbara, how many times has she almost gotten hit? And she said, you don't want to ask. But whether cars driving 20% slower at a 20 mile an hour speed limit would make it safer for her or not, guess we'd have to see. It'd be safer, we think, for FedEx, UPS, Track, DHL, and other delivery trucks, safer for other service vehicles that are in neighborhoods all the time, from your air conditioning repair guy to the guys that are blowing out your sprinklers, etc. It seems like residential speeding, for whatever reason, has increased as the local volume of traffic in Meridian has exploded. I don't know whether it's drivers that are just ticked off because they've been sitting on Locust Grove for 15 minutes trying to get from one end to the other, and when they turn onto the neighborhood, they hit the gas. Whether that's the case or not, but we have noticed there's been an increase in speed within the neighborhoods. So might be frustration, and it just might be another reason. I think it'll also, if people are used to driving slower, for the few days that we get the snow and ice on the roads, might make the roads a little safer when you're used to driving a little slower. And then finally, I think a slower, safer residential speed limit states that the city of Meridian is truly concerned about the welfare of its citizens. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions, comments for Mr. Spivak?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Uh,
Mr.
Mis-
McKinney?
Mr. Spivak, do you have, or are you aware of any research, any studies that have been done that have looked at, what is the accident rate, et cetera, in cities that have a 20 versus a 25 mile an hour default speed limit?
I did a little bit of looking, but I didn't spend a lot of time. I tried going on City of Boise's website and getting a hold of their folks to see, well, why did you reduce your speed limit to 20? It was John who brought that to my attention, that we're at 25, but yet Boise, which butts right up to us, is 20.
Right.
But I had not looked to see if there was any major change.
I would imagine that there have been some studies done on that. That seems to me like a common sort of thing, but it would be nice to have that information before we took an action on this. Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Mr. Chair.
Leclerc?
Mr. Chair, thanks. Well, I think the city of Boise may have data that we could ask for.
They might.
On that last comment. I think the way this might be good is to really partner with the HOAs across the city and sort of make this a voluntary program. When I first heard this, I thought, well, we're slowing things down and it's sort of a negative reaction. But if it's a partnership with HOAs, I really can see that it would make sense to them. I mean, I'm in I don't know how many of us are in subdivisions or neighborhood associations representing us, but it might be a good way to craft an ordinance to make it like a voluntary program or even a pilot program at first, to see if what the participation rate would be with the HOAs, and if they'd help with some of the cost, and because a lot of these do have a major street that goes through them that's faster, and to the people that live there, they don't even get up to 25 before they get to the arterial and have to stop again. So it's not a big negative for them. I can see them favoring it, and it's the arterial type traffic that's going, that's cutting through, is who we're trying to slow down. So, yeah, I've really, Mr. Spivak has done a good presentation, and I think we ought to look at this.
65% of every voter in this city lives in an HOA. When I moved here, retired as a college president in Florida, one of the things I saw working on our own HOA board was other boards that were struggling. HOA really isn't a four-letter word, though a lot of folks don't like them. You can make it a positive thing for the homeowner. So to try to help other HOAs, I formed a nonprofit corporation, IDHOA, IDHOA. People think my license plate is spelled wrong. No, it's IDHOA. And all I do is volunteer my time helping HOA boards across the state with, could be one issue, it could be reorganizing, it could be a lot of things. And I think you're right, Tom, that if and I've got all 2,544 addresses of the presidents and their address of record, because I send correspondence out to them. That's a lot of voters across the state, about 360,000 potential registered voters live in an HOA. So I try to use that contact to promote positive things for homeowners and homeowner associations, but primarily homeowners. But yeah, we could get a hold of them easy. have most of them email addresses.
Mr. Leslie?
So thank you for your presentation, Mr. Speck. In fact, I think I've had an email from you. I was in Copper Basins.
You probably have. We're neighbors.
Yeah. So I would concur with Commissioner McKinney. I'd be interested in seeing what the data shows, and I bet City of Boise has it too. I'm all for slowing cars down in our streets, but it would be interesting to see what the data shows. And maybe this is a question for Mr. Wasson, but are you aware of any HOAs or still public streets, so non-private streets, that have reduced the speed limit below the city standard? Like in Meridian, are there any streets that are set at 20?
Mr. Chair, thank you for asking. John Wasson, Ada County Highway District. There are two that I know of. One that I am going to take corrective action in the very, very near future because the homeowners association has set the posted speed limit at 15 miles an hour. They did it themselves.
Without permission.
The other one is off of Linder Road south of Franklin, and it's a 20 mile an hour, and we're probably going to look at changing that back to 25. There are a couple of neighborhoods that the neighborhood is predominantly inside of Boise, and just a little bit of it is inside of Meridian. And in agreement with MPD and BPD, we have posted those streets at the lower posted speed limit to eliminate confusion amongst drivers as to where do I transition from 25 down to 20 and so on and so forth. And those are primarily off of McMillan.
That's why our sign doesn't say it's a posted miles per hour, just says 20 is plenty.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, what's the course of action? Are we going to study it or ask the council to take a look at this? What do you think, Mr. Lewis?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McKinney?
I move that we table this issue for now and study it for future action.
If that's your desire, I'm ready to vote on it and tell the council to get something done, but just one voice.
I think we need more information before we take action.
And what would that action be?
I would wait to see the information before I decided what action to take.
Well,
The information would be actual, data, studies about the differences between accident rates and so on with a 20 mile per hour versus 25 mile per hour. Also, enforcement issues are relevant in that.
not to argue, who would we ask to bring that information forward? I think we're missing one gentleman that may have some information, that's Sergeant Frazier. Maybe he has some information about speed differentials.
Certainly, I don't care about the source. I mean, any reliable source of information, whether it's from the Ada County Highway District, from the Meridian Police, or from, City of Boise might have relevant information, et cetera. But, at this point, we still need more information to make a decision.
Okay.
If you're interested, put it on your agenda at your next meeting, I'll bring it.
And is that public information, privately information, or what?
I'll tell you whatever I find, I'll cite it. So whether it's City of Boise or Nampa or whatever information I can find, at least I can give you a synopsis of whatever information is out there available. Then you don't have to spend any money having a consultant come in and do a study.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Wasson, excuse me,
Yes, sir.
Can you weigh in? I'll get to you.
I'd be more than happy to. There are two prima facie speed limits in the valley. It's 25 and 20. The exception to that is in unincorporated Ada County, where by agreement with the county, the sheriff's office, we post residential speed limits at 25 miles an hour. County code does not talk about minimum speed limits. It
Right.
defaults to the state code, and state code is 35 miles an hour. you will find that if you change the speed limit to 20 miles an hour, my experience, 19 years being traffic calming in the neighborhood traffic engineer, you will see a change in average speeds of 1 mile an hour or less. And that's the same data that Mr. Sack from our office generated here recently. It's less than 1 mile an hour. The speed limit sign is useful for the police to do enforcement, but to change driver behavior, you have to do something, i.e. narrow the streets, put traffic calming in there, something to change the feel of the road. Otherwise, the road users are going to continue to drive at that speed that they've always driven. Quite honestly, reducing the speed limit to 25 miles an hour, while it will be a burden to us, we can do it. It won't happen overnight, so you will have probably 5, 6, 7 months of us changing posted speed limit signs throughout the county. But it will put a heavier burden on law enforcement to be out there doing their patrolling and their activities.
I spoke with the 2 officers who live in our neighborhood and and asked them that specific question. You can ask our police department, minimum amount of time is spent by police doing speed checks within neighborhoods. They're on the main arterial roads, responding to calls, responding to incidents. If it works in Boise and if it works in Napa, what's wrong with Meridian?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster.
a couple thoughts. So first, Mr. Spiewak, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your presentation. I'm glad that you're here, so thank you.
My pleasure.
I have a question for, I would like to address this while Mr. Wasson is here. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, John, but Mr. Chairman, I am curious. It sounds like there was an ACHD study in Mr. Spiewak's neighborhood, and I'm curious if Mr. Wasson knows some of the details of that study.
Mr. Chair, I do 150 of these a year, and I know I did it in his neighborhood. I don't remember what the numbers are. And unfortunately, I got tagged to come here kind of at the last minute because Mr. Martin was unavailable. Otherwise, I could have brought in the speed study. Anecdotally, we get a number of complaints from neighborhoods where people are driving 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. And that may be true one time out of 3,500 trips over the entire week of somebody doing 35 to 40 miles an hour. Our studies are geared from 1 to 46 miles an hour, and then it goes 47 miles an hour to infinity in the tabular data. So anything 47 or over, I can't tell you how fast they're going. More of the neighborhoods lately have been meeting the criteria based upon volume and not speeds. A couple of years ago, we did modify our traffic calming policy. We eliminated peak hour average speed computation and instead added the 85th percentile and 95th percentile speeds, which are the speeds at which 85% and 95% of drivers are driving at or below. And we also modified the volume numbers for the peak hour volume for collector roadways and ramped that down significantly. So it was a little easier for some of those lower volume collectors to achieve traffic calming policy.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster.
if I may add as well, and then I think I'll be done with this topic for at least now. But first off, John, I'm disappointed that you can't keep all 150 sorted out.
Mr. Chair, that's 150 a year times, let's call it 15 years just to be generous. So
So, thanks for letting me rib you just a little bit. John and I have known each other for a couple of years, but
But I can bring that data in at the next meeting. I can have that available.
Thank you, Mr. Wasson.
But, Mr. Chairman, if I may add as well, so I'm by training and profession a traffic engineer. So this is what I do as my volunteer job. So speed limits is something that I am involved with quite a bit and help to actually, well, yeah, I'm involved with quite a bit, and I'll leave it at that. But I will offer this, that, often people are surprised when I tell them that if done correctly, speed limits are pure democracy, meaning you vote, so the drivers vote with their gas pedal. Okay, if they want a higher speed limit, they should drive faster. If they want a lower speed limit, they should drive slower. Because the speed limit is made to reflect the behavior of most drivers, not to penalize, not to overly penalize otherwise law-abiding citizens. So, it's kind of different than we think, right? So speed limits we don't set speed limits to tell a driver how fast to drive. We set a speed limit that reflects the behavior of most drivers, assuming that most drivers drive prudently. So that's an underlying principle to speed limits. Mr. Spiewak, again, I appreciate you being here. You asked the question, and I'm going to answer it. If it works in Boise and Nampa, why can't it work in Meridian? I'm going to suggest to you that it probably does not work in Boise and Nampa, that drivers in Boise and Nampa probably don't drive any slower than they do in Meridian or Cuna or Eagle. So I like Commissioner McKinney, would like to see some specific data if this is something that we'd like to pursue. My guess is that we're going to be hard pressed to see an engineering evaluation that says the speed limit should be lower than 25. So there's a little bit of my profession coming out in my volunteering work, but those are some of the principles that we're talking about. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. So, Mr. McKinney, our pleasure then is to revisit this next month with some additional information.
Yeah, as I moved before, I'd be happy to reconsider it with some, clear facts in front of us to discuss.
Okay.
So that's my motion, that we table it and discuss it at a future meeting with some data to deal with.
Okay. Just at a future point in time.
Right, a future Transportation Commission meeting, whenever that data is available, whenever there's time on the agenda.
Okay, is there a second?
A second.
All in favor?
Mr. Chair,
Aye.
Excuse me. Discussion?
I just want to weigh in and have us all think about this for a little bit. To me, it's not just the data. It's the mom with the kids in these neighborhoods. And I know it's maybe a stretch for some of us, but it's a feeling of community in a neighborhood. And if that homeowners association can take some ownership of their, at least perceived ownership of their traffic flow, it helps them be more comfortable and happy living in Meridian. So these intangibles are part of this issue too. I just would hope we'd maybe remember some of that as we go forward. I don't really oppose the motion. I think more data is great, but my decision won't be just based on data, and I think this may be an idea that ends up being picked up by the council with or without us. So we just want to take a look at it, and that's good. But I just wanted to weigh in with a little extra
Okay, appreciate it.
value to this. Thanks.
Appreciate the comments. I had called for the vote in favor of the motion to take it up at another time. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you for your time, sir.
Do you want me to follow up, or?
be happy if you would like to, Caleb, can he submit information to you?
Yeah, Mr. Buick, that'd be great, so I'll
Be glad to help.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Good information. Okay, 5A, 5B. 5C, Rails with Trail, Rachel Hukola. So listen, how close did I come on her name?
Not very close.
How close was I?
Hokala.
Hukola, okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself, ma'am, and why you're here.
Yeah, my name is Rachel Haukala. I'm an assistant planner at Compass, and I do the planning for the Rails with Trails project and the public transportation long-range planning.
Very good.
Right, so thank you for having me. So today I'm going to tell you about the Compass Rails with Trails study, which was recently completed. So I'll go over a little background, study results, and next steps, and I'll try to get through this quickly. So the trail we're looking at is along the 35-mile Union Pacific Boise spur line, which is known as the Boise Cutoff. It's in the map there. And this would be a rail with trail, so the rail line would stay in place in this scenario. That's what we're planning for. The trail would be next to it. This line connects downtown Nampa, downtown Meridian, the Boise Depot, the Greenbelt, and more. There's over 140,000 residents within 1 mile of this alignment, which is almost 20% of the Treasure Valley population in 2019. And Compass has a Rails with Trails work group that has been working on planning this effort. We have members from local agencies, health organizations, and bike ped groups, and so it's kind of a regional collaboration to plan this project. Some of the things the work group has worked on are identifying best practices, researching the right-of-way, identifying corridor constraints, and estimating construction costs. And we came to a point where we realized we needed some consultant help to get more information on this, specifically to get better cost estimates and concept designs. So we contracted with Alta Planning and Design, and they did this study this year, spring and summer. And they came in and met with local agency staff and used past work that had been done before, so they weren't duplicating things that we had already done, and made sure to work with the city staff to meet everyone's needs. And this is the study that came out of it, the Rails to Trails feasibility and probable cost study. It was completed in September of this year. The main things that came out of it were typical section identification, crossing type selection, alignment, cost estimates, and overall report. So I'll go through each of these quickly. So for the typical sections, we had these 3 that we gave them, and we asked them to kind of apply these throughout the whole alignment, like where should each of these be on the trail. They took those and made some more technical drawings and added a few others that would be needed to make this trail work. One of those was a constrained section when there's not enough room to have a whole 25-foot cross-section. There's one that's for under bridges and kind of where there's a canal and we need a retaining wall. And then a third one that is a bridge. So then they applied these throughout the whole trail. This is what their map looks like that they made. They color-coded the sections. So the green are the lowest cost, that's section A, and red is highest cost. So here is the section near 3rd Street. They identified that as a type C, which is the 12-foot pathway, 9-foot mixed-use area. And they also looked at crossing types, so everywhere that the trail crosses a road, they identified which type it should be. So like crosswalk, hybrid beacon, and so on. The type 5, the bridge, was already a typical section, so that one, you only see the 4 on the map. So that looks the same way. It's a type 2 there at 3rd Street in Meridian, which is an active warning beacon. So this is what the whole alignment looks like from Nampa to Boise. It starts at 2nd Street in Nampa, and then the east end is at the future Lake Hazel extension in Boise, where that blue line is in the south, or the bottom right corner. And again, these are all color-coded, so the green parts are kind of the lower cost, and the red are higher cost, just to make it easy to identify. So this is the Meridian section. you can see it's mostly this light green, which is typical section B, which is a 12-foot pathway and a 6-foot running path. With staff and the consultants, they decided that would be a good section, and there's enough room for it in Meridian. It seemed to make sense. And then here's this little yellow part, kind of in downtown between Meridian Road and Northeast 6th Street. They used the typical section C, which is a 12-foot pathway and a 9-foot mixed-use area. Some of the other things on the map, this blue line kind of represents where State Highway 16 will be, so that's just something to keep in mind. As we plan this, we'll need to make sure it fits in with that project. These 3 green arrows are potential trailhead locations that were identified, 10 Mile Road, Main Street, and Eagle Road. Just as something to keep in mind for connections and how people would access the trail. At Eagle Road, there's a red line, that's the typical section F, which is a bridge. The consultant recommended that a bridge would be the best crossing type for that, since there's high speed limits and traffic volumes and so on. And there, you can see there's a white line there. This is the rail with trail that Meridian is working on already that you've heard about. So the consultant wanted to make sure to incorporate existing and planned trails that local agencies are already working on, so that we're not duplicating trail segments. We can use what's already going to be there to make it easier. That purple is where the rail line is, just for reference. So the consultant divided up the parts of the trail to make it easier for costing, and kind of just logically divided them that way. These were the cost estimates they came up with. So the capital costs on the top. So the total for the region was $46 million. And then they did a right-of-way estimate using some of our past work with right-of-way. Their estimate was $4 million for the whole right-of-way, but ultimately that will come from discussions with Union Pacific. They own it, so they can really charge us anything for it. And then since Boise has all the sections, I just wanted to divide it up by city. So Nampa is about $13 million, Meridian is close to $15 million, this is for capital, and Boise is about $19 million for a comparison. This is what their cost template looks like. It's all an Excel workbook, so everything we can edit, the unit costs and the different pieces that are in each of the sections. We can change anything as costs change or as we want to change what the sections look like. So we'll be able to customize things if we want. This is how the Meridian page looks. So for each piece of the trail, you can see there's a typical section there. So like if we wanted to change one of them from a type B to a type A, it's really easy to make those changes that we want to do in the future. And the same thing for the street crossings. And then they had a really basic trailhead estimate in there. So the other nice thing is we can use this cost template if we ever want to look at rails with trails for any other spurs in the region in the future. So then they put this all into a report that includes kind of a description of all these parts I've gone through. They also had brief discussions on right-of-way, environmental, those other parts that we'll need to think about. And this was linked in your packet, and I also have a couple of copies if anyone wants to look at it after. And it's on our website. Some of the next steps here, I'm working on making better maps and static maps for the whole thing, and a nice interactive map we can put on our website. These are some of the other things that the work group came up with that we'll be working on in the future. So negotiation and funding strategies, prioritization, all those things to make this trail move forward now that we have this study in place. And that's all I have. I'll stand for any questions.
Questions for Mrs. Buchla? Lancaster?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. So I'm going to ask about the elephant in the room. So is Union Pacific, did they participate in this study, or what's the current thinking at the Union Pacific Railroad?
We, Compass and member agencies have talked to them in the past, and they have been not very interested. We have not talked to them recently, so that's kind of why we wanted to do some of this background planning so that we can have a plan in place to show them this is what we would want to do with this right-of-way, and we'll go to them again in the future, and hoping that things will change over time, and we're gonna try to make a strategy, get some stakeholders on board, maybe things like that might help them understand the value.
Yeah, they're not especially known for being willing to work with anyone, so, you know, wouldn't take it personally, but yeah, I was curious. Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, Rachel, it seems to me, and maybe to put it a different way, it seems to me that if the railroad's not interested in doing this, it's a non-starter, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Second question, what are the likely funding options for this? Where would this money come from, even if the railroad agreed to do it?
There are different federal sources for trails. Possibly if local agencies wanted to help fund it, that would be an option. Maybe stakeholders. This is something that we don't really have developed yet, but we'll be working on this with the work group to think about how we would fund this.
Okay. I know, and I think, you know, the comment that the railroad hasn't been very cooperative, I happen to be friends with a man who worked for many years as an attorney for the Union Pacific Railroad, and he spent all his time dealing with rail accident lawsuits. And I imagine that's the biggest, you know, the Union Pacific, they don't want people near their railroad tracks because they have potential liability for accidents along the way. And so they want to keep pedestrians as far away from their tracks as possible, I think. In any case, this would be great if it could happen. At the moment, it doesn't seem very likely, but even still, it would be a great thing to have.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Hopkins?
So in your cost analysis, the right-of-way is not included in that, right? Or did I miss something there?
Yeah, the consultant did look at it a little bit, but they kind of just used some of our past work that Compass has done, and they came up with a $4 million total estimate.
Okay.
But really, it'll be working with Union Pacific, and Compass had previously done an estimate that was $14 million, but yeah, again, it's kind of high level, so.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Leslie?
So, on the trail access points, I noticed in Meridian, I think there was 3 or 4, but it skipped an arterial every time. Is that to keep costs down? Because if you're making somebody go a whole nother mile or potentially mile and a half to get to the next access point, you know, you may be limiting its adoption by people, especially pedestrians.
Yeah, so that was kind of misleading. I think we called them trailheads, but those were kind of just places where maybe it would be a good place to have a parking lot so people could drive in and park and get onto the trail, but there would be other places that they could access the trail by foot or by bike, yeah.
And my other question was on that one image that had a running path that was separated from I think it was a 6-foot running path separated by a 12-foot multi-use path. I was curious, I was wondering why they thought that would be useful. Why not have a bicycle path that's separated from the multi-use, because the speed differential between a runner and a walker is significantly lower than a bicyclist and a pedestrian.
Yeah, those 3 cross-sections were kind of prioritized by the work group. Those were some of the top ones that they thought would be a good idea, but those kind of design decisions would come more in the future, and we could think about things like maybe it should be bikes that are separated. These aren't set in stone. These are just kind of ideas and what would work for the different areas.
Thank you. I like it. It's great if it happens.
Sukla, I had a question. Whether you have discussions with the railroad, have you had discussions with the businesses that run their equipment between the rail and their warehouses? How do you get through that business and interrupt their commerce?
Since I have been here, I haven't had discussions with them. I have heard that there are some of them that are in favor of this. And that's part of the reason that we wanted to figure out the alignment to try to avoid most of those little spurs where their trains go off to the side. So we would try to avoid those conflicts, but we would definitely want to talk to them in the future to to make sure they were aware of this and okay with it going by their rail spurs.
And another one on the budget. I didn't see an item for environmental issues. There's some, railroads haul some less than benign products. And how do you clean those up for people walking?
Well, one thing we've looked at in the past is EPA has these brownfields grants. That could be an option. Those are used to assess areas like that where there might be contamination and figure out how to clean it up or what needs to be done. So that would be something that could help with that. But yeah, we would definitely want to make sure it's safe.
Okay, very good. Any other comments, questions? Well, Ms. Hukala, I appreciate you coming in. As always, there's a standing invitation from the Transportation Commission to come back and give us more information and keep us up to date. We
Great.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Item 5C, 5D, State Highway 69 Meridian Roads Traffic Study, Mark Wasdahl. Mr. Wasdahl, it's been a while, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Ballard and the rest of the Meridian Transportation Commission. Mark Wasdahl, Idaho Transportation Department, District 3 office. A two-page handout was included for your perusal. And I'll go through a few things what the study is and what the study isn't. Within the last couple of years, you've had the environmental assessment on Chinden. Had an environmental impact statement done on the Highway 16 extension south from or actually originally was, I think, south from 44 to the interstate. There's work being done on the interstate right now in Canyon County. An environmental process is an engineering study. It gives you a concept for construction, and out of that you get an approved right-of-way map, which right-of-way can then be purchased from. What I'm doing here is a planning study. You notice it has a year of 2040. These other studies have out years of 2045 and 2050. That's part of the construction build process there. So I've got a shorter timeline. It's in tune with the current Compass travel demand model, which has a out year of 2040. So we didn't extend beyond that. As I said before, we don't have a right-of-way map that's going to come from here, but we do want to seek to get a future setback line so that if and when we do construction, that we aren't buying buildings. So that's what we're looking at. We're not going to get a right-of-way map, but you are going to get hopefully a setback line from what we do. Our purpose there that we're looking at both the highway itself and intersections for best performance. Obviously, there's a cost factor too, but in a planning study, you can sort of not look at dollars immediately. Looking at safety there and also access management, mostly from that's going to be on the median side. So the traffic study also that because it's a planning study, you might have more than one solution that works. So we weren't going to try to force a single solution if you could have more than one solution out that and use and just understand that. As before, right-of-way requirements, we don't have right-of-way map, we're going to have a setback line. Study limits from all of State Highway 69, but we are not including study work on the interstate itself. That's a whole other scope creep and budget buster. So we realize that's an issue there, but we were looking at 69 and not the interstate, though we do have the effects of the interstate there. Looking at AM, PM peak hours, we're looking at vehicle corridor travel times and intersection delay as some of our metrics. And our study approach, we started, I think our first meeting was in June, and or is it May? Get back there. Caleb Hood is the representative for City of Meridian and has attended. And then we had our last meeting in October. Some of that was to work down the scenarios and which ones we take forward to doing more intensive looks at. The table 1 on the second page goes through those different scenarios that we wanted to run with. Over there, you notice that we ended up getting a break line of where we thought a 6-lane versus a 4-lane would be necessary by 2040, and that turned out to be Hubbard Road. Most of these differ in terms of either signals at the half-mile or not half-mile signals. Whether we have U-turns on the local ACHD roads or have them on the state highway, whether we're looking at a partial displaced left turn or CFI, or another abbreviation for it. So, number of different scenarios to look at and work through. So we're looking at having 2 identical public meetings, one in Meridian, one in Cuna. Come January, we don't have a date set for that. We're still working through the process. Also bringing back post that Meridian Transportation Commission will hear a full report, as well as Cuna Planning and Zoning, City Councils for Meridian and Cuna, as well as ACHD Commission, RTAC, and Compass boards. So we wanted to advertise well what we saw going forward out to 2040. Something else not placed in here that we'd like to get guidance on is ITD typically doesn't put down sidewalks, adjacent pathways, etc. on our right-of-way. It should be accounted for as part of a future setback line. You don't want to have your setback line say, oh, we forgot to put, if we want a pathway, we forgot to put the pathway there and there's a building there now. I know City of Cuna in their comp plan, which they just did within the last year, at least on arterials, they had separated pathways or sidewalks they wanted. My question as part of this is, what is a separated pathway or sidewalk to you? When the Cloverdale overpass was put in on the north side, ACHD put 2-foot strip of, or at least it was planned out for a 2-foot strip of grass, call it, and then a sidewalk. Is 2 feet a separated pathway on Meridian Road? That's what we're looking to get some guidance on that. I think of that because we've had feedback. There's a separated pathway on Highway 44 on the south side west of Eagle Road, and at some points it comes closer to 44 than at other points, and we've had some contact from some citizens saying it's too close to 44. So that's why I'd like to get a sense or direct from the cities. I think that pretty much the city influence areas, I think, cover it all, so I don't think Ada County is necessarily involved on that. What does setback mean to you? Tell us ahead of time. Part of how ITD works, when the Cloverdale replacement project came through, I was contacted immediately by higher-ups and said, find out what the plans are for bicycle paths, bicycle facilities in this area. So I got to go through everything I could find from the city of Boise, the neighborhood bike ped plan from ACHD. I got to speak with Brooke Green, who was then, I think mostly, somewhat now, the bike ped coordinator for ACHD. And from that, we knew what the existing plans were for the facilities there. ITD would prefer to have existing plans worked rather than have to go through an entire process if it hasn't been gone through yet to find out what a local jurisdiction actually wants. In terms of the Cloverdale project, we didn't have time. That was on a very fast timeline, and we needed to know what they wanted then. There was no time for the whole process. And so what we're trying to do here is to mimic that, just make sure that we have, you know what you want, and if something comes up quickly, there's no need to go through an entire process to find out what we should have already found out before. So, I think I've probably barraged you enough, and I will stand by for questions.
A lot of information. Questions for Mr. Wasdell? Mr. Leslie, you have one, I take
I
it.
do, thank you. On the setback for the bike ped issue, I recently saw profile of 2026
Yes.
west of Eagle with the separated pathway on the south side that's going in first. What is the gap between the distance between the roadway and the, is it, I wanted to say it was like 10 feet?
I
would imagine-
Project, I know they had rural drainage there, just like you've got on Eagle Road at the village. So you do have some distance there, and it's set behind the drainage swale. But just at certain points, I know it comes in at you want to bring it in at the intersection so that motorists can see who's operating on it instead of being set back so far. They're going to possibly miss a bicyclist on their approaching. Yeah, I don't know the exact setback on those, or that varies much.
My suggestion would just be to maybe take a look at that, and maybe something similar for 69. But 2 feet I would not feel comfortable walking next to
But that's a 35
vehicular
mile with
traffic
curb
with a
and
2-foot
sidewalks.
buffer.
Other questions for Mr. Wasdell? A lot to chew on, very quickly.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McKinney?
just on that same subject, I would think you would want a minimum of a 10-foot setback, probably ranging from 10 to 20 feet for a pathway. That's all.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis?
if I could comment, I think on the recent Eagle Road study that our firm did for the city of Meridian and Boise, I believe on Eagle Road, we had an 8-foot separation and an 8-foot minimum separation and a 10-foot path. I mean, maybe I can ask Caleb if that's correct. Sounds what we did, yeah.
Yes, I'm trying to remember, we have received a building application via the city of Meridian on Meridian Road. I'm trying to think, was that a 10-foot sidewalk pathway that was on that? It was at Harris.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the city standard pathway is 10 feet wide, and we do designate all highways to have that pathway, not just a 5-foot detached sidewalk. The 8-foot comes into play mostly along ACHD's right-of-way because that's the minimum width that they'll allow to put trees in it. It used to be 6 with root barriers, and 8-foot no one puts root barriers in, so you basically make them 8 feet wide. That's what the Eagle Road study calls for, again, consistent with ACHD standards. City code, what we require new developers to do is also put in the landscape buffer along the street, and this is an entryway corridor. And typically, if private development's coming in, like at Harris Street, they put in a 35-foot wide buffer, and we allow the pathway to go somewhere in that 35 feet. So there's a minimum of 5 feet we require, 8 if you're gonna put trees, right? So it has to be at least 5, could be as many as 25, I guess, if you want to put it on the far back side. But that's essentially what it comes down to is if trees, 8 foot from a curb. I was just trying to pull up the 2026 cross-section to see what that swale looks like there. And it's at least 10. I think it's even up to 20 and 25 feet as you continue further to the west. So that pathway is really detached from the travel lanes. I guess long story short, it varies. We wouldn't allow 2 feet. If you're a developer coming into the city, we wouldn't allow 2 feet. Realize you're not a developer, but that's our code requires with development that be put in, again, a minimum 5 to 10 feet from the curb.
Mr. McKinney?
If I may, just to add to that, though, I believe the 8-foot setback is an area where they have curb and gutter. So on Meridian Road 69 going south of the city, where we have a rural section with just shoulders without curb and gutter, I would expect you would need a greater separation in those sorts of areas.
Maybe if I can just clarify one other thing. So then that 35-foot landscape buffer that's required with development is outside that right-of-way. So you do essentially get 2 foot of a shoulder or whatever that may be And then, so you're again, automatically 10 to 12 to 15 feet even further back from that with these, again, with development, not if you're the state doing a project, but with development, it does end up being set back further.
And by and large, our right-of-way in the corridors, call it 130 feet, 135 feet total. So, also, I forgot to bring up one thing that we've done in this. I know that there's a potential Linder overpass. So we looked at that, and we're going to we aren't endorsing having it there or not having it there, but we studied it, and it has a larger effect on Overland Road traffic, not so much on Meridian Road south of Overland. But it's about 8,000 vehicles a day, and it's pulls from both the 10-mile and the Meridian interchanges. So just like Locust Grove, if you don't want to mess with the interchanges, you can go to Locust Grove, go over. So we can run with it, we can run without it, but we just said we'd put it in and see what happens.
Other questions, comments for Mr. Wasdale? Well, very good, Mr. Wasdale. Always good to see you, sir. And again,
Likewise.
always outstanding invitation to come back and visit with us.
I intend to.
Thank you. Before we take up item 5E, I'm looking at the clock. We have 12 minutes to take up 5E, and I think we out of courtesy to the presenter, but where I'm going with this is if we pass 5:30, we need to take a vote to extend our meeting 15 minutes per the bylaws. Lancaster, will you make that motion, or where you sit on that, sir? Because I'm trying to figure out if we can get to your 5G and H that you put in there. I don't think so, but.
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to make that motion either now or at 5:30. Which do you prefer?
Well, I think with courtesy to the presenter, we'll give them, they're on the schedule for 20 minutes, and we should at least recognize that, so.
So, Mr. Chairman, I move that we extend the commission meeting until 5:45.
There a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 5E, fixed route transit planning. Alyssa Taysom, excuse me, I'll get, bear with me. I'll get it, I'm working on it, ma'am. And Caleb. So, Alyssa, are you up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Alyssa Taysom, Associate Planner with Valley Regional Transit. And I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of an update today as to where we are with the fixed route expansion to Meridian. We are going to be meeting this week with some area stakeholders just to kind of discuss the expansion, how that's going to affect them, listen to their comments and their concerns, kind of their, keep in mind what it is that the developers in the area, such as Central Cal, Brighton Corp., including MDC, are looking at and where they would like to see the fixed route line going, as well as what we have received from the public. We are also working with Compass to gather data to help us figure out the alignment. They're going to be helping us gather together the total employment along the proposed corridors, population estimates, household and multifamily household numbers, as well as the development permits and entitlements that we're going to be seeing in the area. We're also wanting to continue to stay engaged with you as we continue on this process, and I have attached a schedule for you so you can anticipate what you're going to be seeing over the next year as we develop this alignment and this expansion. Do you have any questions?
So, fixed transit, you're bringing a bus to Meridian, I take it, if I could put it in the vernacular?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you tell us where it's going to be?
Is going to be running from 10 Mile to Kleiner Park. What that alignment is going to be, we don't quite know yet, is going to be coming through the downtown area, connecting from the park and ride that we've got over at 10 Mile to Kleiner Park, and hopefully we'll eventually be able to provide a connection to Boise to provide more commuting options for Meridian residents.
And how many vehicles?
Right now, we're looking at 2 vehicles for Meridian. They are going to be the electric buses. They're already in the works for purchasing, so.
Very ambitious. Mr. Lewis, that's kind of near and dear to your heart and my heart a couple of years ago, huh?
Yes, it started with the Saturday Fun Bus.
Yes, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Hopkins.
So that one stop is at, you're going to initiate this at 10 Mile. It's certainly not going to come down Overland, is it? To get there, you're going to take it down in through the city?
That's going to be the plan. It's not going to go like straight up Overland down Eagle or anything. The idea is to get it through Meridian. We're looking at 10 Mile. We're looking at 5 Cherry Lane, Fairview, Main, and Meridian. We're looking at
Stops along the route?
Yes, yeah. There's going to be several stops along the route.
And then you said 2 vehicles, so that would they be like offsetting, so you'd leave one direction and you're leaving the other direction at the
Yes.
same time, so they're passing?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So obviously, the timing will be determined better when we get the alignment figured out.
Other comments, questions? So I was looking at your schedule,
Mm-hmm.
and you were talking, and maybe I should have read it or analyzed it a little deeper. What is it that you're asking the commission to do or help you with?
We're going to continue to come back to you for essentially input on public messaging, on the route alignment, anything that we would reach out to the public, we're going to be coming to you as well.
Okay? Very good.
Mr. Chair, if I can just interject real quick, just essentially plan this being a standing agenda item for the next year. Some months it may be just a 2-minute, here's what we're gonna do for PR, are you cool with that? Sometimes it may be looking at those bus stops, and in particular going, should this be a shelter? Do we need any other amenities? Helping us plan the route. So some of them may be more intense than others, but this will essentially be a standing meeting topic for, again, roughly a year or so.
And I apologize, I was
No.
addressing my comments to her, but you were on the presenter board too, so. Other questions for the panel? Well, very good. We appreciate your information and look forward to continuing to discuss this.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. 5E, okay. Staff communications, Mr. Hood.
Mr. Chair, just so we can make it through everything, I'll let you read those. I do want to highlight, though, next month and in between, I need to be working with you and maybe the vice chair a little bit on the annual report, because the clerk wants that due by December 20th, I think is what he requested. So we'll put that together, put that on your agenda. We can certainly take comments from you all as you endorse that, hopefully, next month in December. But typically, I like to have a draft, wordsmith it, bring it back to you so you can see the final version, but I'll have to have you that working draft final version in December. But everything else, I think in the staff memo, we've already talked about or will be talking about here in a minute, so.
Okay. Now, I saw that request for homework, and you've pulled the labor and ore the last couple of years, and it's a debt of gratitude I owe you.
If we can tag team that again, I think that tends to work well, so I'll give it a shot and then get your blessing, hopefully. And again, Commissioner McKinney, you're going to be looped in as well, so.
Very good. Okay. Okay. 5F. So, Mr. Lancaster, you had added a 5G, the role of the Transportation Commission and road signs. What would you like to take up, sir?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would like to take those as 2 separate issues. We talked about signs somewhat already, but I'd like to talk about it, I guess, a little more specifically. But before that, if I may, I guess if I can share a couple thoughts about what I have been thinking about as far as the role of the Transportation Commission There's been two events, one kind of ongoing, one-time event in the past month that have me reinvigorated in my role as Transportation Commissioner. The first is our election tomorrow. So as I mentioned earlier, a oft-mentioned topic in the campaigns has been transportation, traffic issues, and frankly, that's encouraged me and has, we may perhaps have a increased role in influencing our city and our community here in the coming future. So I've been excited about that, reinvigorated by that. Also within the past month, and this has been talked about, our city council and, in the case of one of the ordinances, mayor, voted to create 2 new city ordinances. I'll withhold my thoughts about those ordinances, but share that one of those ordinances this body, this commission had recommended to not pass, and it was passed, as I recall, by a vote of 5-1.
5-2.
So I am frustrated by our, if this commission exists to advise, that our advice wasn't heeded. Now, on the other ordinance, this commission was, and if you'll recall from my edit to our meeting minutes, this commission was informed but not asked to recommend or advise. And I think that was a topic that should have come to this commission. So I see some opposing movements, I guess, if you will. So we have some people campaigning to be elected, to be our elected officials that are saying that transportation is a very important issue. On the other hand, we have our current elected officials that have appointed us, that have confirmed us, but have not been seeking our advice, it seems. It's not lost on me either that our city council representative hasn't been here for a few months. So I'm reinvigorated by both of those things. I think our Transportation Commission can take a active role in this new city government that will be selected tomorrow. So I would like us, this is my request of us, I guess, to review and evaluate our role as a commission through our ordinance that creates this commission, through our bylaws, and have a discussion about our role as commissioners. So this is probably a topic that's bigger than just today, but I think it's an important topic, and one that I think is, again, personally, I'm reinvigorated by these two events for different reasons, and I would like to see our role elevated, our involvement elevated. So rather than having transportation decisions being made around us, that we should insert ourselves in those discussions at the very least.
Very good. Mr. Lancaster, other comments? I have a response, but I'll wait to hear from any other commissioners.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. McKinney.
I have some thoughts on this. I mean, basically, I share Mr. Lancaster's concerns. The primary reason for those concerns and the primary reason that these facts exist is that this commission is an advisory body only and has no actual authority to take any action. So unless or until the city council changes city ordinances to give this commission actual authority, then to advise is merely to talk. And when politically elected officials have the power to make decisions, they won't necessarily listen to their advisors. They very often listen to the people, and sometimes it's the clamor of the masses for things that aren't necessarily wise, and that can be in any realm but of course, we're primarily concerned with transportation issues. So, inserting ourselves more, I see two ways that could happen. The one would be lobbying city council to change the city ordinances. And, you know, there are certainly some aspects of transportation policy that could be decided by this board. And then, similar to the way that planning and zoning decisions are made, can be appealed to the city council if the, if the decision is not preferred by the recipient. But in any case, unless that happens, the only other thing I think we can do is just make sure that when we do make recommendations to the city council, that perhaps we send a representative to the council meeting to speak on behalf of the commission, to present our recommendation and the reasons for it. That can at least help influence, in any case, public opinion that's often expressed at those city council meetings.
Very well said. Mr. Hood?
So just, Mr. Chair, if I can piggyback on that real quick, and then I'll hand because your last action was to recommend that the council not adopt the unmuffled compression brake, air brake ordinance. I did come and testify on your behalf to the city council. That said, I don't know that I was eloquent as maybe the maker of the motion would have been if he were here lobbying for that. I said my piece and tried to, do my job as directed, but I didn't show the passion, didn't show, you know what I mean? So I did that. So I'm just trying to echo kind of what, you can still play a role even outside of this commission. You're citizens as well. You can come and testify. And I would even ask that you not put me in that position in the future. I will say though, and I'm not trying to defend the mayor and council, but they listened, and quite honestly, they continued it. And I'm not going to say solely because of your recommendation, but they did not take action that first night. They tabled it for a week and acted the next night. So, and I'll, just one more thing since I have the mic. I know we're late. Councilman Cavanagh did send me an email. He's been traveling the last couple months, so I don't know that I'd read too much into that. Maybe there is something there, but I don't think there's anything intentional there. I do know that the council as a whole does appreciate what you all do. They tell me as much. I know I appreciate what you do. We recognize your volunteers. Have they heeded your advice of it? No, but they do take it seriously. So for whatever that's worth, anyways, I'll stop there, but just wanted to let you know that you are appreciated. So.
I think, Mr. Lancaster, I was thinking back, so you and I have sat on this committee, or I've been 5 years, I think. I remember, or going back maybe 2 years ago, and we were, no pun intended, kind of at this crossroad. But the advice was to let city council know and let the mayor know that we would be willing to bite off a bigger chunk and consider. And so, to echo Mr. McKinney's comments, we want a seat at the table. We asked to be sat at the table. So that's part of your comment, I think. And to lobby city council. I think it's well said to appoint a representative, if you will. So I think we need to assert ourselves. Granted, we're advisory. I have clients that ignore some of my comments on occasion, but that's
They
their...
still have to pay you.
But, I mean, that's their prerogative, because you give your best advice, see? Okay, but be that as it may. Not all, but, so I think it is well said, and that is a matter of how do we get up there and get in front. Mr. Lancaster, I need to back up and maybe make a bit of a confession. So after we took the vote last month, I went back and I read the compression brake ordinance. And so the vote was 5-2. If I was to do it over, it would be 4-3, because I would be on the nay side, because I went back and I looked at it. So the purpose was to mitigate noise, so it did serve a purpose. And by definition, we kind of got wrapped around the axle, no pun intended. But by definition, it was a device that uses the compression of the engine to slow the vehicle. So that being said, at the end of the day, the city said, well, we're going to address a noise issue. But when it's all said and done, we want to be heard. I think we have to step up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I've liked this discussion, and yes, this is kind of the intent that I was hoping for us to talk about. But I guess I'll just add, I think it would be hubris to assume that the council or elected officials will always vote the way that we advise them to, but I would like to I would like to know that our recommendations are heard and considered. I would like to be asked to advise on all transportation-related issues, right? As you say, you and I have been doing this for a little while, and we talk about these things from time to time, whether it's, yeah, I'll leave it at that. But so it has less to do with, if I dare say, it has less to do with the decisions that were made. It was more how they were made, and the fact that in at least the case of one ordinance, we weren't even asked. Right? We were informed by Sergeant Frazier, but we weren't even asked to provide a recommendation. So that's what bothers me most, I guess. So.
Well, so back with Mr. McKinney, we're invited, we're advisors, but I'll just throw this out because I thought about it. There will be a new decision made tomorrow, a new administration. Do we knock on the door, or do we wait for that administration to come and have a conversation with us?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can tell you that I've been knocking on the door already to every candidate that's running for city office tomorrow, so.
Well, you're lobbying for us, so you're one step ahead. So, and it's always kind of interesting because I remember we had the conversation about the school and the traffic and whatnot, and there were some pretty smart people making some comments, and I think our youth member said, there's one fact you haven't looked at, or one fact that hasn't been discussed, and to me that was kind of a key of the puzzle. So what I'm saying there is there's value of bringing information in front of us to make a comment, because we can bring that one fact that may shed some light. So a consensus on how we move forward, or is this discussion enough, Mr. Lancaster?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the discussion. I think I'm going to throw this out there. So we will have new officer elections soon, right? And perhaps that would be the appropriate time. So Caleb put up here the ordinance that creates this commission. But perhaps, and maybe this is an annual thing for us, is when we have elections, we review our ordinance and bylaws, for a refresher, if we still want that to be our bylaws, that sort of thing. So perhaps that's a next step that I might suggest, Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Hood, I'll just venture out there, exercise a little executive privilege maybe, and say in the report, do we put a line in there that the Transportation Commission would like a more responsibility, or we can work on some language, but we would welcome the opportunity to have more tasks submitted to us. And maybe that's the time for the report, when we make that report, that we're eager to take on a bigger bite.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
it's just a suggestion box that just popped in my head. But we just were asked by ATD to give a technical definition of a separated pathway. That seems like something we could do that city council wouldn't need to care about. It seems like we could create a category of technical applications or technical regulations that the commission could have total say over. And if someone objected to what we did, they could appeal it to the city council. But there'd be, like planning and zoning has control over applications for development, we would have control over maybe elements of those applications, or maybe, roadway, right-of-way specifications and regulations that are set by the city, by us, that if the city council doesn't like them, they can take them up and review them and throw them out or amend them. But we have first say, and we have sort of the originating authority in an area. And we don't have that now. It would seem like there's plenty of areas where this commission could do more technical work that would help developers understand what the city wants and help agency partners like VRT and ITD and ACHD understand what the city standards are, and we do that. And that'd be our turf. That's just a thought that maybe we could proceed with.
Well,
We need an ordinance change to do that.
it is an appreciated thought. It is outside of our bylaws, and I would suggest that reaches almost to a constitutional law issue. An administrative board that is not elected, that jams through a law. I would be opposed, but I'm only one vote. But I understand what you're saying, but within our framework, we can work on, how to, if we take a bigger bite, but you ask for more work, you got to shoulder both sides of the equation. Okay. Hey, we're at 5:47, 3 minutes, or 42, excuse me. Not to cut off the discussion. Lancaster, we didn't get the signs. I think we covered somewhat earlier, with some comments earlier, but I get it. 30 seconds or less, how do you wrap it up, sir?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I am hopeful that we can have a bigger discussion about this. I perceive that there's probably going to be a demand for faster timeliness than we can address in the next month or 2 months. But I'd like to share a few thoughts about providing road signs for whatever kind of law, whether it's city ordinance, whether it's for county laws, state laws, whatever. So again, my background is as traffic engineer, and it's, I think people look at me funny when I say that the people that make signs are the ones that recommend fewer signs. So here's some thoughts. So the roads and highways are not billboards for laws, right? I think it's great that police is, doing an education campaign, getting billboards, TV ads, radio ads, whatever that might be. That's the appropriate place to make advertisements or education, right? The highway is not the billboard for all laws. I also feel strongly that a law doesn't need to be on a sign to be enforced. We don't have signs that say, "Don't murder." It's against the law to murder, right? That's kind of an extreme example, but you don't have to put everything on a sign for it to be an enforceable law, right? And not to pick on Sergeant Frazier, we haven't worked together very long in this capacity yet, so don't feel like I'm picking on you. But I do see a difference between the example that Sergeant Frazier gave of speed limits and city ordinances. So speed limits we post on roads because that speed limit can change depending on what road you're on, right? It's specific to that road. So a citywide ordinance is not specific to any one road, it's specific to a city, and we can argue, and we kind of talked about this last time, that maybe it's not even a city issue, but that's, neither here nor there, we've been past that. But the point being, again, that there doesn't have to be a sign on the road for it to be a law that can be enforced. I also think I'll use the word hubris again, for a city that doesn't own its roads to assume that if they pass an ordinance, that they can demand the agencies that do own the roads to post signs for them.
The legislature's got a couple of statutes that let them do that.
Well, okay, but so for all of those reasons, I'm opposed to having any sort of sign like that. So that's covering, specifically the compression brakes, hands-free, but that could be for any ordinance, right? So I would have the same, I would give you the same speech no matter what that local ordinance might be.
I gotta call time here, but.
Okay.
So, to wind this up, do we want to continue this conversation as a future topic? Or are you good with what we addressed? And I don't mean to cut it off.
Mr. Chairman, I do think that it's something that we should further discuss and provide advice on.
Okay. Mr. Hood, can we put that on a future meeting topic? We'll wrap this up, Commissioners. So we have future meeting topics. Our next meeting is January 2, 2019. The clock has run out, so
Make a motion.
we're adjourned.
We adjourn.
David, that sounded a little rough. That didn't come out right.